The night I found out I was folding laundry. That is the part I always come back to when I think about it now. The absolute ordinary of it. The smell of line-dried cotton, the particular way the last of the evening light was coming through the bedroom window, the sound of my children breathing in the next room, asleep. I was folding my husband's shirts the way I had folded them 1,000 times before, smoothing the seams, pressing the collar flat with my palm, stacking them in the order he preferred. And then my hand found something in the breast pocket of his good shirt, the one he wore to market, the one he wore on the days he said he was going to pick up feed and would be back before supper. It was a folded piece of paper. And I knew before I opened it. I knew the way you know certain things in the body before the mind has caught up. A drop in the chest, a change in the temperature of the air, the sudden, loud sound of your own breathing in a quiet room. I opened it anyway, and then I stood there in the middle of my bedroom floor with a half-folded shirt in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. And I understood that the life I thought I was living was not entirely the life I had been living. What I did not know yet, what took me weeks to understand, was that what would happen next had almost nothing to do with my husband and almost everything to do with me. Before we go any further, there's something I want to say from the heart. More than 90% of the people watching right now haven't subscribed yet. And perhaps that wouldn't matter so much if these stories were just words. But they're not. They're pieces of a life. Pieces of a silence that lasted years. Pieces of women who were never supposed to speak out loud. So if you found something of yourself in this video, please take a moment to subscribe. It's completely free and it helps this community keep growing. And while you're here, I want to know something. Tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered something that changed everything in a single ordinary moment when you weren't even looking? Let me know below. My name is Clara, and this is Clara the Amish Girl, the channel where the things that were never supposed to leave the kitchen finally get said out loud. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio. I married at 20. I stayed for 11 years. And in those 11 years, I learned things about how our community handles the particular devastation of a husband's unfaithfulness that I have never heard spoken clearly by anyone who actually lived inside it. So I am going to speak them clearly now. And I need you to stay with me, because what happens inside an Amish marriage when a husband strays is not what you would expect. And the part that will stay with you longest is not the part about him. I need to tell you first what the piece of paper said, because I think the details matter. It was not a love letter. It was not dramatic in the way the outside world imagines these things are dramatic. It was a note, written in English rather than Pennsylvania Dutch, which was itself a kind of code. A note from a woman in a town 12 miles away. A woman who worked at the hardware supply where Eli sometimes stopped on his way back from market. The note was short. It said only that she had thought about him and that Thursday still worked, if it still worked for him. That was all. 4 lines. And yet those 4 lines contained an entire architecture of deception that I had been living inside without knowing it. Thursday after Thursday, market trip after market trip, the feed that needed picking up, the errand that always seemed to take a little longer than it should have. I put the note back in the pocket. I finished folding the shirts. I put them in the drawer in the order he preferred. And then I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought about what I was going to do with what I knew. In the outside world, I understand now, there are options. There are conversations that begin with confrontation. There are doors you can walk out of. There are lawyers and apartments and friends who will come sit with you on your kitchen floor at midnight and tell you that you deserve better. I did not live in that world. I lived in a world where what happened inside a marriage was the business of the marriage, and the business of the community, and the business of God, in that order. And where a wife who made her husband's failings visible was considered to have committed a kind of violence against her own household. I did not confront Eli that night. I did not confront him the next morning either. I lay beside him in the dark and I listened to him breathe, and I thought about the woman who had written 4 lines in English, and whether her hands had shaken when she wrote them, or whether she had written them easily, the way you write something you have written many times before in your head. I thought about Thursdays. I counted them back in my mind. All the Thursdays of the past year. The ones where supper had gone cold waiting. The ones where I had told the children that Papa would be home soon. The ones where he had come in smelling of road dust and hay and had eaten quietly and gone to bed without much conversation. I lay there and I counted Thursdays. Until somewhere past midnight, I finally stopped and closed my eyes and made myself breathe slowly, and decided that I needed to talk to someone before I decided anything at all. The woman I went to was named Ruth. She was older than me by 20 years, and she had the particular quality of stillness that some Amish women develop after enough seasons of absorbing things quietly. She was not a close friend. She was the kind of woman you go to when you cannot go to your mother and cannot go to your sisters, because what you are carrying is too large and too dangerous to put down in front of people who love you too much to see it clearly. I went to her on a Wednesday morning while Eli was in the fields. I sat at her kitchen table and I told her what I had found. I told her about the note and the Thursdays and the woman 12 miles away who wrote in English. And Ruth listened to all of it, with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup and her eyes on the table. And when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "Clara, what you do with this will shape the rest of your life inside this community." And she was not talking about Eli. She was talking about me. She explained it to me the way you explain something to someone who needs to understand it completely and has only one chance to hear it. In our community, she said, when a husband strays, the question the community asks is not, "What did he do?" The question is, "What does she do now?" Does she handle it quietly, inside the marriage, with God's guidance and the counsel of the bishop? Or does she make it a public thing, a loud thing, a thing that requires the community to take sides and hold meetings and issue consequences? A wife who handles it quietly is a wife who understands that a marriage is a living thing, and that living things go through illness, and that illness is not always a reason to destroy what has been built. A wife who makes it loud is a wife who has decided that her own wound matters more than the stability of her household. And the community, Ruth said, has a very long memory for which kind of wife a woman turns out to be. I want to stop here and let you feel the weight of that for a moment, because I think it is important. What Ruth was describing to me was not cruelty. She was not telling me to accept what Eli had done, or to pretend it had not happened, or to fold his shirts and say nothing forever. She was describing the architecture of a system, and she was describing it accurately and without apology because she lived inside it the same as I did, and she had learned that accurate maps, however painful, are more useful than beautiful lies. What she was telling me was that inside our community, a wife's response to her husband's betrayal is judged more carefully than the betrayal itself, and that judgment will follow her for the rest of her life in that place. I went home and I made supper and I fed my children and I put them to bed. And when Eli came in from the fields, I set his plate in front of him and I sat across from him and I watched him eat. And I thought about Ruth's words, and I thought about the note in the breast pocket, and I thought about the woman 12 miles away. And I thought about the life I had built in this house, the garden, the children, the cellar full of preserves, the curtains I had sewn myself, the rug I had braided over 3 winters, the whole weight of an ordinary life constructed from 10,000 ordinary days. And I thought about what it would cost to blow all of that apart. And I thought about what it would cost not to. I told him I knew. I did it quietly, after the children were asleep, sitting at the same kitchen table where I had sat across from Ruth that morning. I said his name, and then I said, "I found the note in your good shirt." I said it the same way you might say, "I found a button missing," or "I noticed the fence needs mending." Flatly, without decoration. Because I had learned by then that the flatter the voice, the more room it leaves for the other person to understand the size of what has been said. Eli went very still. Not the way Jonas went still in the kitchen sink story. Not the stillness of a man making a decision. The stillness of a man who has been caught and is trying to calculate how much has been seen. He did not deny it. I will give him that. He sat there, and after a long time he said, "It is over. It has been over." I did not respond. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I let the silence sit between us. And I waited to feel something that would tell me what to do next. What I felt was not rage, not grief exactly. Something more like a very deep and very quiet tiredness, the kind that settles into the bones rather than the muscles, the kind that sleep does not touch. We talked for a long time that night. I will not tell you everything that was said because some of it belongs only to that kitchen and those 2 people sitting across from each other in the lamplight. But I will tell you the shape of it. He spoke. I listened. He explained, not excused. I want to be careful about that word. He did not excuse. He explained, which in some ways was worse, because explanations require you to understand something you would rather not understand. I asked the questions I needed to ask. He answered them. And by the time the lamp was burning low, we had arrived at the place that most Amish couples arrive at when they find themselves in this particular darkness. The place where the only path forward that the community, the faith, the whole structure of the life you have built together will recognize is the path that goes through forgiveness. In the outside world, forgiveness is personal. It is something you do in your own time, on your own terms, for your own healing. Inside our community, forgiveness is communal. It is something that happens with witnesses. What that meant for Eli and me was that within 2 weeks of that kitchen table conversation, we were sitting in the bishop's home, the 3 of us, with the bishop's wife present also. And Eli was confessing before God and before the church leadership what he had done. And I was sitting beside him. And the bishop was speaking about the mercy of God and the covenant of marriage and the possibility of restoration. And I was sitting in a chair in the bishop's front room, looking at my hands in my lap and thinking about the woman 12 miles away and whether anyone had gone to sit with her in a bishop's front room and speak to her about covenant and restoration. That is the part that took the longest to process. The other woman. In our community, she was addressed separately, privately, by the bishop of her own district. I was not told what was said to her. I was not part of that conversation. She was not brought into ours. The 2 situations were handled in parallel, in the way that Amish communities handle complicated things, by dividing them into manageable pieces and addressing each piece separately, so that the whole never has to be looked at directly. I do not know what happened to her after. I do not know if she stayed in her community or left. I do not know if anyone sat with her the way Ruth sat with me, and explained to her also that the question was not what he had done, but what she would do now. Eli stood before the church. He confessed. He was placed under a temporary shunning, 6 weeks, during which the community withdrew from him in specific ways that I do not need to detail here. He bore it quietly and without complaint, which the community noted and approved of. After 6 weeks, he was restored. The community moved on. And I, who had not strayed, who had not been placed under shunning, who had sat quietly in the bishop's front room with my hands in my lap while my husband confessed, I moved on too. Or I did something that looked like moving on from the outside. The inside was different. The inside was the kitchen table at night, after the children were asleep and the lamp was low, and I was sitting with the full weight of what I had decided to do with the life I had. I had decided to stay. I had decided that with small children and no money of my own, and a community that would close around my husband's restoration and leave a divorced wife standing outside every door she had ever known, staying was the only architecture available to me. And so I stayed. And I became, over the years that followed, something that looked from the outside like a woman who had forgiven. And perhaps it was forgiveness. I am still not entirely sure I know the difference between forgiveness and the decision to survive inside the only life you have. What I know is this. The community protected the structure. It protected the marriage, which is not always the same thing as protecting the woman inside the marriage. It gave Eli a path back that was clear and well-lit and walked by many men before him. It gave me a role to play in his restoration, the patient wife, the forgiving wife, the wife who had handled it quietly and proven herself to be the right kind of woman. And I played that role. I played it for years. And inside the playing of it, very slowly, very quietly, something was growing that the role could not contain. My therapist, years later in a small office in a town I had only visited twice before, gave me words for things I had never been able to name. Institutional protection of the perpetrator, the silencing of the victim through communal pressure toward forgiveness, the way that systems built around preserving structure will always ask the wounded person to heal quietly so that the structure does not have to bear the cost of what happened to them. I sat in that office, and I heard those words, and I thought about Ruth's kitchen table and the bishop's front room, and the 6 weeks of Eli's shunning, and the years of my quiet. And I felt something that I can only describe as the sound of a lock opening somewhere very far inside me. I am not telling you that the Amish way is entirely wrong. I am not telling you that every marriage that survives infidelity should not have survived it, or that forgiveness is not real, or that communities are not allowed to value stability. I am telling you that inside the way our community handles this particular thing, there is a cost that is paid almost entirely by the wife. And that cost is invisible because it is paid quietly, in kitchens, at night, with small children asleep in the next room. And it does not show up anywhere in the record of what happened, except in the careful stillness of a woman who learned that her wound was less important than the structure her wound had threatened. If you have ever been asked to forgive publicly before you were ready to forgive privately, I see you. If you have ever been told that staying quietly was strength when what you actually were was trapped, I see you. If you have ever sat in a room where your husband's restoration was the subject and your healing was not mentioned once, I see you. You were not weak for staying. You were not wrong for surviving in the only way available to you inside the life you had. And you were not alone, even when every structure around you was designed to make you feel like you were. The note is gone. I don't know when I threw it away, somewhere in the years between that bedroom floor and this seat. But I remember exactly the weight of it in my hand. 4 lines in English. A Thursday that still worked. A woman 12 miles away who had no idea she was leaving something behind that would start a slow unraveling that would take years to complete and cost more than either of them had calculated. I remember standing on that bedroom floor with the half-folded shirt and thinking, I need to decide something. And I remember the deciding taking much longer than one night, much longer than 6 weeks of shunning, much longer than anyone who was watching from the outside would ever have guessed. Some decisions, I have learned, are not made in a single moment. They are made slowly, in the dark, one quiet night at a time, until the morning comes when you finally know what you have decided. If this story touched something in you, please tell me in the comments. Tell me what stayed with you. Tell me if you have ever been asked to be the bigger person in a room where you were also the most wounded person. And if you want to keep hearing the stories from behind the prayer cap, the ones that were never supposed to leave the kitchen, subscribe to Clara the Amish Girl. There is so much more I still need to say. Before you go, I want to say this. More than 90% of the people who watch these videos still haven't subscribed. And every time I think about that, I think about all the women sitting quietly somewhere, listening, carrying something heavy, not yet sure if they are allowed to put it down here. You are allowed. Subscribe. It is free, and it helps these words keep reaching the people who need them most. Until next time, remember this. You were never required to heal quietly just because you were hurt quietly. Your wound was real. Your silence was survival. And you were always worth more than the structure that asked you to disappear inside it.